The galaxy had always known war. From the moment the first intelligent species reached the stars, conflict had followed. Empires rose and fell, fleets clashed in the void, and weapons evolved with each battle. To the rulers of the Zenari Dominion, war was not just a necessity, it was an art. The Zenari were among the oldest and most powerful species in the universe. Their warships were massive, covered in thick armor and armed with weapons that could destroy moons. They had fought and conquered for centuries, crushing any species that dared to resist. To them, war was predictable. Every enemy, no matter how strong, eventually surrendered or was wiped out. But that was before they met humanity. On the edge of Zenari-controlled space, a deep space surveillance station detected an unknown fleet approaching. The transmission was shaky, filled with interference, but one thing was clear. These ships did not belong to any known empire. Their design was unfamiliar, their energy signatures unreadable. High Commander Verishkul, the leader of the Zenari fleet, received the report while standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Zorvok Eternal. He barely paid attention. Another primitive race, no doubt, he muttered. Send a battle group. Destroy them before they waste more of our time. The Zenari war machine had crushed hundreds of civilizations before. To them, this would be no different. A Zenari battle group, consisting of 5 heavily armed warships, moved toward the incoming fleet. The lead ship, Dralek's Fury, sent out a warning message. Unknown vessels, you are entering Zenari space. Power down your weapons and prepare for inspection. Failure to comply will result in your immediate destruction. There was no response. The Zenari commander, irritated, ordered his ships to charge weapons and fire a warning shot. A massive energy blast streaked across the darkness of space toward one of the unknown ships. Then something happened that made every Zenari officer on the bridge freeze. The energy blast vanished, absorbed by an invisible force around the unknown vessel. Before the Zenari could react, the ship turned, and for the first time, they got a clear look at it. It was massive, nearly 3 times the size of a Zenari battleship, but its surface was smooth, almost featureless. Instead of the sharp, aggressive design of most warships, this one looked like a dark monolith drifting through space. It had no visible weapons, no glowing energy cores, no weak points. But the most terrifying thing was that the ship did not appear on sensors. It was like a shadow, a ghost in the void. Then a voice, cold, mechanical, and emotionless, echoed through the Zenari communication systems. Stand down. Zenari commanders were trained never to back down. To retreat was dishonor. To hesitate was weakness. The lead ship, Dralek's Fury, fired its main cannon at full power. A white-hot beam of energy, strong enough to melt a small planet, shot toward the mysterious ship. The result was instant. A black field rippled around the unknown vessel, and the beam simply disappeared. Then, the ship finally attacked. There was no visible flash, no explosion, just pure destruction. The Dralek's Fury was suddenly gone, as if erased from existence. One moment it was there, the next, nothing remained, not even debris. Panic spread through the Zenari battle group. They fired every weapon they had, launching torpedoes, plasma bolts, and disruptor waves. None of it worked. The ship advanced, silent and unstoppable. Then, another voice message came through. This time, it was different, calm, yet filled with something ancient and powerful. This war ends now. The remaining Zenari warships turned to flee, but it was too late. One by one, they vanished, erased by an enemy they did not understand. On the Zorvok Eternal, High Commander Verishkul watched in horror as his battle group, the same fleet that had once conquered entire civilizations, was wiped out in minutes. The transmission from the unknown fleet came directly to his ship now. A single word: humanity. Verishkul had never felt fear before, but in that moment, as he watched the silent, unstoppable force move deeper into Zenari space, he knew one thing. The galaxy had just changed forever. Varish Kull sat motionless on the bridge of the Zorvok Eternal, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. 5 of his warships, some of the finest in the Zenari fleet, had been wiped out in mere moments. No wreckage, no survivors, simply erased. Around him, the officers and crew whispered nervously, their usual discipline crumbling under the weight of what they had witnessed. For the first time in his long career, Varish felt something he had never known. Doubt. The enemy had spoken a single word: humanity. That name meant nothing to him. The Zenari had files on every known species in the galaxy, but none of them matched the power that had just been displayed. Who were these creatures, and what kind of warship could defy the very laws of battle? A lieutenant approached cautiously. "High Commander, what are your orders?" Varish clenched his fists. He could not show weakness now. "Send a transmission to High Command. Tell them." He hesitated, swallowing his pride. "Tell them we need reinforcements." The moment the words left his mouth, a chill settled over the bridge. The Zenari Dominion never called for reinforcements. It was a sign of weakness, an admission that the enemy was beyond control. But Varish knew that to underestimate this new foe would be suicide. Across the galaxy, in the heart of the Zenari homeworld, the message reached the War Council. Within hours, 100 warships were mobilized. The largest fleet ever assembled in Zenari history, enough to crush entire civilizations, was now headed toward the unknown. And yet, deep inside, Varish feared it still would not be enough. Far away, in the darkness of space, the horizon raft drifted silently. Inside, Admiral Jonathan Hale stood on the command deck, watching the battle footage from his ship's sensors. The Zenari warships had barely lasted a minute. Their weapons had been useless. Their defenses, laughable. Hale turned to his chief strategist, Commander Lena Carter. "What do you think?" Carter exhaled slowly, arms crossed. "I think they just realized their worst nightmare." Hale nodded. "Good. The war against the Zenari had been a long time coming. Humanity had watched them for years, seen them enslave, conquer, and destroy without mercy. Other species had begged for help, but no one had dared to challenge the Zenari directly. No one except Earth. But this was no ordinary war. Humanity had evolved past traditional combat. Their weapons were not just powerful, they were beyond the galaxy's understanding. Reality-manipulating energy fields, AI-driven warships, weapons that could bend space itself. To the rest of the universe, it was magic. To humanity, it was just the next step in warfare. Hale glanced at the navigation screen. The Zenari fleet was moving in fast. 100 warships, maybe more. The largest armada they had ever deployed. He smiled. "Let's show them what war really is." The Zenari fleet arrived in formation, their massive warships spreading across space like an iron curtain. Their commanders had no doubt in their victory. "This time, they will burn," one of them snarled. Their ships locked weapons, scanning for the enemy. Nothing. Not a single human ship in sight. Confusion spread through the fleet. Their scanners were state-of-the-art, capable of detecting ships light years away. And yet, silence. Varish Kull felt unease creep into his bones. He knew they were here, but where? Then, without warning, alarms blared across the fleet. Ships began vanishing. One by one, without a single shot fired, entire Zenari battleships blinked out of existence. No explosions, no wreckage, just gone. Panic took hold. "Where are they?" a captain shouted. Varish turned to his sensors officer, who was staring at his screen in horror. "High Commander." His voice trembled. "They are already inside our formation." A deep mechanical voice echoed through every Zenari ship. "Your war is over." Then, for the first time in Zenari history, an empire that had never known defeat realized what it meant to be powerless. Panic spread like wildfire across the Zenari fleet. Ships vanished one by one, silently and without resistance. This was no ordinary war. This was something far worse. High Commander Verishkul stood frozen on the bridge of the Zorvok Eternal, staring at the empty void where his warships had been only moments ago. "This is impossible," one of his officers stammered. Varish clenched his jaw. "No, this is something we fail to understand." The enemy had not fired a single shot. No visible weapons, no energy signatures, just pure, calculated destruction. The Zenari war machine, undefeated for centuries, was being unmade before his eyes. "Find them," Varish bellowed. "I want every scanner, every probe. Locate those ships." But the answer was already clear. Humanity was no longer fighting with technology. The galaxy understood. This wasn't about firepower. It was about control. On the bridge of the Horizon Wrath, Admiral Jonathan Hale watched the chaos unfold on his holographic display. The Zenari fleet was collapsing without a single direct engagement. Lina Carter smirked. "They still think this is a normal battle." Hale crossed his arms. "It's not their fault. They've only ever known one kind of war." For centuries, the galaxy had fought battles the same way. Bigger fleets, stronger weapons, better strategies. Humanity had studied this pattern for decades. Then, they broke it. Quantum disruption warfare. That's what the scientists called it. To the rest of the galaxy, it was impossible. Instead of traditional weapons, human warships utilize reality phase disruptors, capable of severing objects from spacetime itself. Instead of shields, they used graviton distortion fields, making direct hits meaningless. Instead of fighting the enemy, they removed them from the battlefield altogether. Hale turned to his AI specialist. "Is the Zenari flagship isolated?" The AI's synthetic voice responded instantly. "Affirmative. Initiating tactical suppression." On the Zorvok Eternal, the lights flickered. The crew gasped as their screens turned black. Every console, every control panel shut down at once. Varish's blood ran cold. What is happening? The engines stopped. The weapons powered down. The ship drifted, helpless. Then the bridge speakers crackled to life. "Your fleet is gone. Your weapons are useless. Your war is over." The voice was human, calm, in control. Varish clenched his fists. "No, I refuse to surrender." The bridge crew turned to him, waiting for orders. But there were none to give. Their weapons were disabled. Their ships were vanishing into nothingness. The war had already been lost. Then, for the first time in his life, Verishkul felt something far worse than defeat: irrelevance. The Zenari had spent centuries believing they were the masters of war. But war had changed. Humanity had not just become stronger. They had left the galaxy behind. The transmission continued. "This is your only warning. Surrender now, or your entire empire will cease to exist." Silence filled the bridge. Varish knew the truth. The Zenari were no longer fighting an enemy. They were fighting the future itself. The bridge of the Zorvok Eternal was silent. The crew barely moved, their faces frozen in disbelief. The war, their war, was over before it had even begun. Verishkul stood in the center, fists clenched, breathing heavily. Surrender. The very thought made his stomach twist. The Zenari Dominion had never surrendered. They had ruled through conquest, crushed rebellions, burned civilizations to the ground. They were war. And yet, his fleet was gone. His ship was dead in space. And the voice, the cold, human voice, had made it clear. This was mercy. A warning. Nothing more. The humans could have erased them completely. They hadn't. That was the most terrifying part. Varish turned to his officers, all waiting for his command, waiting for him to tell them what to do next. But what was left? He exhaled, feeling a weight he had never known press against his chest. "Surrender the fleet," he said at last, the words like poison on his tongue. The crew hesitated. They expected him to fight. They expected defiance. But there was no fight left. The communications officer, trembling, activated the emergency frequency. Across the remnants of the Zenari fleet, a single message was transmitted. "This is High Commander Verishkul of the Zenari Dominion. We surrender." Silence. Then the human voice returned. "Acknowledged. Stand by for further instructions." No arrogance, no gloating, just absolute control. And then the transmission cut. Far beyond the battlefield, in the hidden depths of Terran High Command, Admiral Jonathan Hale leaned back in his chair, watching the surrender confirmation appear on his screen. Lynna Carter folded her arms. That's it. No final stand. No desperate last attack. Hale shook his head. No, the Zenari aren't stupid. They just learned the hardest lesson in history. Carter smirked. That they lost. No, Hale said. That they were never even playing the same game. The war was over, but humanity's mission had only begun. This was just the start. The galaxy had long been ruled by warlords, empires, and conquerors. Every species followed the same cycle. Expand, dominate, collapse. It had been this way for thousands of years. Humanity had broken that cycle. And now, it was time for the galaxy to adapt or be left behind. Hale turned to his operations officer. Begin Phase 2. A deep mechanical hum filled the command center as unseen forces began moving. Across the stars, human ships that had been hidden for decades revealed themselves. Entire armadas, planets that had been thought barren suddenly lighting up with activity. The Zenari were the first to fall, but they would not be the last. Humanity had not just won the war. They had redefined existence itself. Deep within the heart of the Zenari Dominion, in the throne room of the Imperial War Council, the transmission played in chilling silence. We surrender." High Commander Verishkul's voice echoed through the chamber, a voice once filled with power and arrogance, now hollow. Defeated. The Zenari rulers, towering figures draped in ceremonial battle armor, stared at the screen in disbelief. Their greatest fleet, their most powerful warlord, had fallen without a true battle, without a single human casualty. One of the counselors, an elder warrior named Lord Stull, slammed his clawed fist against the stone table, his eyes burning with rage. "This is a deception, a trick. Our fleets are unmatched. The humans must have used some forbidden technology, some unnatural force. Enough." A voice, cold and commanding, cut through the tension. The Emperor of the Zenari Dominion, Sovergsen the Eternal, rose from his throne, his violet eyes locked onto the transmission screen. Unlike the others, he did not rage, did not curse. He simply watched, calculated. He had ruled for centuries, had seen every kind of war imaginable. But this was something new. "Show me the battle reports," he commanded. Holographic displays flickered to life, showcasing the final moments of the Zenari fleet. Dozens of warships vanishing in an instant, not destroyed, erased. Another screen showed the Horizon Wrath, the human flagship, its dark, featureless hull reflecting the void. The ship seemed unnatural, silent, a predator in the dark. Sovergsen narrowed his eyes. What weapons did they use? The War Council scrambled for an answer. None came. Lord Stull bared his fangs. "We must retaliate. Gather every remaining fleet, strike at their homeworld. If they want war, we shall give it to them." Sovergsen remained still. Then, his lips curled into something almost like amusement. "You still do not understand, do you?" he whispered. The chamber fell silent. The Emperor turned his gaze to the flickering images of erased Zenari warships, to the hauntingly calm voice that had spoken to Verishkul. "This was not war," Sovergsen said. "This was a lesson." A cold realization spread through the council. The humans had not conquered them. They had demonstrated their superiority. If the humans had truly wished it, the Zenari homeworld would be nothing but silence and dust. But they had not attacked. They had simply shown what they could do. And now, The Zenari Dominion was faced with a terrifying choice: submit to the new order, or be erased from existence. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Jonathan Hale stood in the grand halls of the United Terran High Command, a fortress of steel and glass overlooking the heart of the planet. Before him, the leaders of humanity, the Terran Council, watched as the final battle reports played across massive display screens. The war was over, and yet Hale knew this was only the beginning. The Zenari were just the first. There were hundreds of empires, warlords, and species that still ruled through force. Species that saw diplomacy as weakness, that believed power came only through war. But humanity had evolved past war. They had developed weapons beyond firepower, technologies that did not simply destroy, but rewrote the battlefield itself. The galaxy had played by one set of rules for millennia. Now those rules had changed. Hale turned to the Council. The Zenari Dominion will not be the last to challenge us. There will be others. There will always be others. A senator, an older woman with sharp eyes, nodded. And what do you propose? Hale's expression was unreadable. We do not rule them. We do not conquer them. But we will make them understand. Understand what? Hale's gaze darkened. That war, as they know it, is over. Forever. A deep, unsettling silence had settled over the Zenari homeworld. From the highest towers of the Imperial Palace to the dark slums of the Undercities, an unease had crept into the bones of every citizen. For centuries, they had known only conquest. They had never feared another species. Now they did. News of the surrender had spread faster than the High Council could contain it. The unbreakable dominion had been broken. Their fleets had been unmade without a fight, their most decorated warlord humiliated, their weapons reduced to irrelevance. And yet, the humans had not demanded their submission. They had not sent their armies to occupy Zenari territory, had not imposed their rule. They had done something worse. They had left. The sheer disregard was terrifying. Humanity had no interest in ruling them, no interest in war, in territory, in resources. They simply did not see the Zenari as a threat. That was what burned the most. Inside the Imperial War Council's chamber, Lord Stoll pounded his fists against the war table. We cannot allow this humiliation to stand. We must retaliate. A younger general, his face pale, whispered, "With what? Our fleets are useless against them." Stoll turned, rage in his eyes. "Then we build new weapons, stronger, more advanced. We will find a way to counter their technology." The room remained silent. They all knew the truth. The humans had not just outmatched them, they had surpassed the very foundations of war itself. The Emperor, Soverexin, remained still on his throne, his expression unreadable. He had not spoken since the meeting began. He let them argue, let them cling to their delusions of defiance. Finally, he stood. The room fell silent. "Enough," Soverexin said, his voice cold and sharp as a blade. "We do not fight a war that has already been lost." Stoll growled. "Then what do you suggest?" "That we kneel." Soverexin turned his piercing gaze upon him. "No, we learn." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Emperor stepped forward, tapping a command into the central console. The war table flickered to life, displaying the last known location of the human fleet. "They are stronger than us," Soverexin said. "That much is clear. Their technology is beyond our understanding. Their tactics rewrite the very nature of battle itself. But power alone does not make a species infallible." He turned to his council. "The humans have given us a lesson. Now we must decide. Will we be the fools who refuse to adapt, or will we be the ones who learn from the greatest warriors in the galaxy?" Silence. Then one of the younger counselors hesitated before asking, "And if we learn?" Soverexin's lips curled slightly. "Then one day, the Zenari Dominion will rise again, not as conquerors, but as something far more dangerous." He turned his gaze toward the stars. as equals. Meanwhile, on Earth, Jonathan Hale stood before the massive viewport of the Terran High Command, staring out into the void. The war was over, but something gnawed at him. Lynna Carter approached, arms crossed. "You don't look happy for someone who just won a war without firing a shot." Hale didn't answer immediately. He exhaled slowly before saying, "They'll come back." Carter frowned. "The Zanari. We crushed them." "Yes," Hale admitted, "and that's exactly why they won't stop." For the first time in history, the Zanari had lost, and a species that had ruled through war for centuries did not simply fade into irrelevance. Hale turned back to the viewport. "They have a choice," he said, "to either evolve or disappear." Carter scoffed. "If they evolve, doesn't that make them even more dangerous?" Hale's expression darkened. "Maybe, or maybe for the first time in their history, they'll finally understand what it means to be more than just warriors." He glanced down at the encrypted data scrolling across his personal display. Surveillance reports, Zanari activity, signs of rapid scientific and technological shifts. They were learning, and in the vast, ever-changing cosmos, nothing was more dangerous than an enemy who had learned from their defeat. Hale narrowed his eyes. The next war wouldn't be fought with fleets. It would be fought with something far more dangerous. Ideas. The galaxy had changed. Whispers of the Zanari defeat spread like wildfire across every starfaring civilization. Empires that had once feared the Dominion now watched in silence, unsure of what came next. Some celebrated, others trembled, but they all asked the same question. What would humanity do now? Zanari Prime, Imperial Palace. The war banners had been taken down. Where once golden insignias of conquest had adorned the great halls, now stood only cold, empty walls. Sover Ixen, Emperor of the Zanari, sat in his throne chamber, staring at the holoscreens before him. His fleets were gone, his warlords humiliated, his people ashamed. And yet, he did not see this as the end. It was an awakening. For too long, the Zanari had relied on the same cycle of dominance. Attack, expand, conquer, repeat. They had ruled through fear, believing that power was the only universal language. But humanity had rewritten the meaning of power. They had not conquered the Zanari. They had not occupied their worlds, enslaved their people, or plundered their resources. They had simply erased the idea of war itself. Sover Ixen clenched his jaw. "This is not defeat," he murmured to himself. "This is the beginning of something far greater." His advisors stood before him, waiting. He had gathered only the most brilliant minds, scientists, strategists, and visionaries. The warlords were absent. They had no place in the future he envisioned. A young researcher, her voice trembling, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, our analysis of human technology is incomplete. Their methods, their science, it defies our understanding." Sover Ixen's eyes burned with determination. "Then we must evolve. We must change our very foundation." The council exchanged nervous glances. The Zanari did not adapt. They conquered. One of the older strategists spoke hesitantly. "You are suggesting we learn from the humans." The Emperor stood, his silhouette casting a long shadow across the hall. "No," he said, "I am suggesting we become something greater. The old ways were dead. The Dominion would not rebuild itself through brute force. If war no longer ruled the galaxy, then the Zanari would master the new order." Earth, Terran High Command. Jonathan Hale scrolled through intercepted Zanari transmissions. Lines of encrypted data ran across his screen. Scientific projects, technological shifts, resource allocations. "They're adapting," he muttered. Lynna Carter raised an eyebrow. "Should we be worried?" Hale leaned back in his chair, staring at the galactic map. "Not yet, but we should be prepared." Carter smirked. "Isn't this what we wanted? They're finally moving beyond war." Hale exhaled. "Maybe, but evolution is unpredictable. When a predator realizes it's no longer the apex force, it either dies or transforms into something even more dangerous. The galaxy was watching. The Zenari were watching. And humanity was no longer just a species in the stars. They were the force that defined the future. Hale closed the transmission feed, his mind already on what came next. The war was over. But the real battle, the battle for the future of the galaxy, had only just begun.